Hi there, welcome to Borderlink Reporter TV. On today's episode, we'll be talking on merciful truth. In this segment, we bring to you some hidden truth around the world. What's up, history buffs and curious minds? Before we continue, please hit the subscribe button. Welcome to our deep dive into how Europe basically played Risk and won on a global scale, stealing African resources with impunity. It's very sad, but a reality. We're talking about European imperialism, folks, a wild ride through time where one continent decided to paint the world its own color. Picture this, it's the 19th century, and Europe's looking at a map like it's a giant game board. Early in the game, they've got a decent chunk of land, maybe 35% of the world. Fast forward to the 20th century, and bam, they've conquered a whopping 84% of the planet. This wasn't just about claiming some land and calling it a day. This was about ambition, innovation, and yeah, let's be real, a whole lot of domination. We're gonna break down how Europe went from a bunch of kingdoms to the world's biggest landlord, and trust us, it's a story wilder than any Netflix series. So buckle up, because we're about to uncover the legacy of power that still shapes our world today. Hold up, before you think this is just ancient history, think again. The impact of European imperialism is like the foundation of a house. You might not see it, but it's holding everything up. Remember those borders on a map? Yeah, many of those were drawn by European powers, often with zero regard for the people actually living there. Talk about bad roommates, am I right? And let's not forget the economic systems. European powers basically set up shop, took resources, and left many former colonies in a tough spot, economically dependent and trying to play catch-up ever since. European languages, religions, and cultures spread like wildfire, for better or worse. But this cultural exchange came at a cost, often silencing indigenous voices and traditions. By understanding this history, we can start unpacking the world we live in today, and maybe, just maybe, learn from the mistakes of the past. Let's rewind to the 15th century. Europe's feeling cramped, like a teenager stuck at home. They're hungry for adventure, spices, and gold. Enter the age of exploration, where explorers claimed continents. Spain and Portugal led the charge, expanding empires. Portugal, guided by Prince Henry, set up African trading posts. Columbus, aiming for India, bumped into the Americas. The New World was a treasure chest of gold and resources. Now imagine two siblings fighting over a giant pizza. That's basically Spain and Portugal after stumbling upon the Americas. They're both eyeing up the prize, ready to claim it all for themselves. But luckily, before things could get too heated, Big Brother steps in to mediate. And by Big Brother, we mean the Pope. In 1494, Pope Alexander VI, a man of God with a knack for real estate deals, drew a line down the Atlantic Ocean, like he was splitting a restaurant bill. This line, established by the Treaty of Tordesillas, gave Spain control of most of the Americas, while Portugal got dibs on Africa and a slice of South America that would eventually become Brazil. But here's the catch. This whole agreement completely ignored the fact that there were already millions of people living in these newly discovered lands. Indigenous populations were treated like an afterthought, their voices silenced as European powers divvied up their homelands. Hold on to your hats, folks, because things are about to get brutal. Spain, armed with conquistadors, guns, and a thirst for gold, wasted no time in conquering vast empires in the Americas. The Aztecs, the Incas, these were sophisticated civilizations with rich cultures and complex social structures. But to the Spanish, they were just obstacles standing between them and unimaginable wealth. Meanwhile, Portugal was busy establishing its own empire in Brazil. Sugar became their gold, and vast plantations sprang up across the land, fueled by the forced labor of enslaved Africans. It was a system built on exploitation and cruelty where human beings were treated as mere commodities, bought and sold to maximize profits. The transatlantic slave trade, a dark chapter in human history, was in full swing, forever linking the fates of Europe, Africa, and the Americas. But in the midst of this darkness, there were glimmers of cultural exchange, creating new syncretic cultures that still exist today. Remember those other European nations eyeing the colonial buffet with envy? They weren't content to sit on the sidelines forever. England, France, and the Netherlands were ready to challenge Spain and Portugal's dominance. England's navy of daring explorers and privateers started nipping at Spain's heels. France set up shop in Canada, claiming vast territories for fur trading. The Dutch East India Company set its sights on Asia, establishing trading posts and colonies. Alright folks, let's talk about the Netherlands. Now when you think of global empires, you might picture sprawling landmasses, exotic spices, and maybe some questionable fashion choices. Looking at you, powdered wigs. But the Dutch? Well, they were out here proving that even a tiny country with more canals than cars could become a global powerhouse. Surrounded by powerful neighbors, they decided to ditch the whole land-grabbing thing and focus on what they did best, sailing and trading. They built ships like it was nobody's business, sleek and efficient vessels that could navigate treacherous waters and haul serious cargo. The 17th century was their time to shine. They were like the Beyoncé of maritime trade, dropping hit after hit and dominating the charts. They established colonies and trading posts all over the place, from the Americas to Asia, connecting continents and raking in the dough. But here's the real genius of the Dutch. They understood the power of innovation. They weren't afraid to try new things, to experiment with new technologies and business models. Now buckle up, because we're about to enter the world of big business 17th century style. Forget Apple, Google, or Amazon. The original corporate giant was the Dutch East India Company, or VOC for short. This wasn't just a company, it was a beast with its own army, navy, and the power to negotiate treaties. They had a monopoly on Dutch trade in Asia, controlling nutmeg, cloves, pepper, you name it. They muscled into new markets and built a trading empire that spanned the globe. Hold on to your tulips, because the Dutch were about to unleash a force more powerful than a windmill in a hurricane modern capitalism. Now, before you start picturing Wall Street suits and stock market tickers, remember this was capitalism in its early stages, still figuring out its own algorithm. The Dutch, with their trading prowess and knack for innovation, were at the forefront of this economic revolution. They created a system where goods, capital, and ideas flowed freely across borders, connecting distant corners of the world in a web of commerce. Think of it as the original Silk Road, but with more ships and fewer camels. This new era of global trade wasn't just about spices and silks, though. It was about a fundamental shift in how the world worked. It was about supply and demand, about competition and innovation, about the pursuit of profit above all else. The Dutch, with their East India Company and their global network of trade, had shown the world what was possible. They had opened the floodgates, and a tide of economic change was about to sweep the globe. Alright, history buffs, let's fast forward to the late 18th century. Europe's going through some serious growing pains. The old school of mercantilism, where countries hoarded gold like it was going out of style, was starting to feel, well, a little outdated. Enter the Industrial Revolution, stage left, with a bang and a cloud of coal smoke. This wasn't just about new inventions, it was a whole new way of life. Factories were popping up like mushrooms after a rainstorm, churning out goods at an unprecedented rate. Suddenly, Europe's got more stuff than it knows what to do with. But here's the catch. To keep those factories humming, they needed raw materials. And where were those raw materials? Oh, right, in all those lands they'd been colonizing for the past few centuries. This, my friends, is where imperialism 2.0 kicks into high gear. It's not just about finding new trade routes or grabbing a few spices anymore. It's about securing resources, controlling markets, and becoming the ultimate global superpower. Think of it like the difference between playing checkers and playing chess. The stakes just got a whole lot higher. Quinine and the scramble for Africa. Africa had always been a mystery to Europeans. They'd explored the coasts and traded for goods. But malaria made the interior dangerous. Then, French chemists isolated quinine. It was like magic against malaria. Suddenly, the dark continent wasn't so dark. The scramble for Africa had begun. Section 3. The sun never sets on the British Empire. A global hegemon emerges. One empire emerged as the undisputed champion Great Britain. They were like the Michael Jordan of imperialism. From the Americas to Asia to Africa, the sun literally never set on the British Empire. They had a powerful navy, a disciplined army, and a knack for playing their enemies against each other. The Brits were also masters of diplomacy and economics. It was a system designed to benefit the mother country. Britain was the world's superpower. Their culture, language, and institutions were spreading like wildfire. A time of unprecedented British power and influence, but also a time of growing tensions and resistance. The Berlin Conference and the carving up of Africa. Imagine this, it's 1884 and you're at the most awkward dinner party in history. The guests? Representatives from all the major European powers. The main course? Africa. The Berlin Conference was a gathering so infamous, it makes family reunions look like a walk in the park. They carved up Africa like a birthday cake, ignoring the people living there. They drew borders with the precision of a toddler with crayons, setting the stage for future conflicts. The legacy of the Berlin Conference is still felt today, a stark reminder of colonialism's impact. Let's talk about Africa, a continent so vast and diverse it makes Europe look like a peninsula. For centuries, Europeans traded along the coasts, exploiting resources and engaging in the transatlantic slave trade. The interior remained largely a mystery. Imagine you're a European power in the late 19th century. You need raw materials to keep factories running. Africa, like a giant treasure chest, was waiting to be unlocked. But Africa wasn't just empty land. It was a continent of incredible diversity with thousands of languages, cultures, and empires. All right, history buffs, gather round because we're about to witness one of the most audacious acts of geopolitical engineering in human history. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 1885. 14 European nations plus the United States deciding the fate of a continent. And who wasn't invited? Oh right, the Africans. The goal was to prevent a European war over Africa by dividing it up peacefully. Except of course for the whole ignoring the people who actually lived there part. The Europeans drew lines on a map as if they were playing a game of Risk. They carved up territories with little regard for existing ethnic boundaries. The Berlin Conference sowed the seeds of future conflicts. Hold on to your pith helmets, folks, because the scramble for Africa is about to get real. With the ink barely dry on the Berlin Conference agreement, European powers were off to the races. It was like a giant game of colonial capture the flag, planting their national symbols and exploiting resources. King Leopold II turned the Congo Free State into his personal fiefdom, committing shocking atrocities. European powers justified their actions in the name of progress and civilization, often ignoring African voices. Traditional societies were disrupted, ancient empires crumbled, and seeds of resistance were sown. Section 4. The price of progress, resistance, exploitation, and the seeds of change. The scramble for Africa was a tragedy for millions. European colonialism left a legacy of exploitation and violence. But amidst the darkness, there were stories of resistance and resilience. People rose up against their colonizers, refusing to be subjugated. The seeds of liberation were sown during these tumultuous decades. The technological edge, outgunning and outmaneuvering the competition. All right, history buffs, let's talk tech. Europe wasn't playing fair. They had the latest gadgets. Imagine showing up to a knife fight with a tank. One of their secret weapons? The gun. Muskets that could fire farther and faster, and cannons that could level fortifications. European powers also had the edge in transportation. Steam-powered ships allowed them to navigate rivers and transport troops with speed. Section 2. Maps. Not just for navigation, but for domination. Maps weren't just tools for navigation, they were instruments of domination. Mapping a territory was like claiming it, imposing order on the world. They drew lines, named places, and divided continents, often disregarding existing boundaries. These maps justified territorial claims and coordinated military campaigns. They were powerful symbols of European control, shaping how people viewed and lived in the world. Military might. From muskets to machine guns, technology fuels conquest. European imperialism wasn't just about fancy maps, it was about brute force and military might. European powers excelled in developing efficient ways to kill. The 19th century saw a revolution in military technology. Breech-loading rifles gave European soldiers an edge. Machine guns mowed down enemy ranks efficiently. This technological superiority devastated indigenous populations. Battles often became one-sided massacres. The message was clear: resist and face the consequences. The telegraph and the taming of distance. Imagine running an empire across continents with time zones and language barriers. It's enough to give even the most seasoned administrator a migraine. But Europe had a solution: the telegraph. This marvel revolutionized communication, transmitting messages with lightning speed. Administrators could now communicate in hours or days, not weeks or months. The telegraph symbolized European control and efficiency. It coordinated military campaigns and maintained empire control. For the colonized, it was a double-edged sword. It improved trade but also facilitated subjugation. Authorities could monitor movements and suppress dissent. The telegraph shaped European imperialism, a tool of progress and oppression. Stay tuned for more insights on Borderlink Reporter. The rise of scientific racism. Things are about to get seriously messed up. European powers needed mental gymnastics to justify conquering lands. Enter scientific racism, the twisted love child of bad science. This was a time when science was still figuring things out. Darwin's theory got twisted into social Darwinism. Phrenology claimed intelligence by measuring skull bumps. Guess who always scored higher? Europeans. This pseudoscience had real-world consequences. It justified colonialism and subjugation based on supposed superiority. All right, folks, buckle up for some next-level hypocrisy. So, European powers have conquered half the world, exploited resources, and enslaved populations. But here's the kicker: they genuinely believed they were doing everyone a favor. Enter the concept of the civilizing mission, a self-serving delusion that would make even the most delusional dictator blush. According to this belief, Europeans had a moral duty to bring their superior culture, technology, and of course religion to the uncivilized masses. It was like a global makeover show, but instead of outdated furniture, they were fixing entire cultures, often with disastrous consequences. Missionaries armed with Bibles and a healthy dose of cultural arrogance fanned out across the globe, converting people to Christianity, often by force or coercion. They established schools that taught European languages and values, effectively erasing indigenous knowledge systems and traditions. It was a classic case of "we know what's best for you," with European powers imposing their own worldview on the rest of the world. The civilizing mission was a convenient excuse for domination, masking the brutality of colonialism behind a veneer of moral righteousness. Now let's be real, folks. Even back then, not everyone was buying into this civilizing mission nonsense. Critics, both within Europe and in the colonies, pointed out the glaring contradictions at the heart of colonial ideology. How could European powers claim to be spreading enlightenment and progress while simultaneously engaging in slavery, exploitation, and brutal oppression? It was like saying you're promoting world peace while simultaneously punching everyone in the face. The reality was that progress often came at a steep price. Indigenous populations were displaced from their lands, their cultures disrupted, their traditions undermined. The environment suffered as well, as forests were cleared, resources plundered, and ecosystems pushed to the brink. The contradictions of colonial ideology were impossible to ignore, and they fueled a growing movement for change. From the halls of academia to the streets of colonized cities, people were rising up, demanding an end to exploitation and a recognition of the inherent dignity and equality of all people, regardless of race, religion, or origin. All right, history buffs, remember those European empires that were strutting around like they owned the place? 2 world wars threw a massive wrench into the whole empire business. Those lofty ideals of national self-determination started to sound pretty good to the people they'd colonized. The era of empires was coming to an end, and a new chapter in world history was about to begin. Now, let's talk about those folks who said, enough is enough. Across Asia, Africa, and the Caribbean, anti-colonial movements were gaining momentum. These weren't just ragtag groups of rebels, they were organized and strategic. Think Mahatma Gandhi in India, promoting non-violent resistance, or Kwame Nkrumah in Ghana, leading his nation to independence. These leaders turned Western ideals against their oppressors. They argued that colonialism was a big, fat contradiction, and they were willing to fight for their right to self-governance. All right, folks, time to redraw those maps again. After World War II, former colonies declared independence, stepping onto the world stage as sovereign nations. Empires dissolved, and new countries emerged faster than you could say decolonization. But breaking up is hard, especially when your ex still tries to call the shots. The transition was rarely smooth sailing. Some European powers resisted with brute force, leading to bloody conflicts. Even peaceful transitions bore the long shadow of colonialism. Newly independent nations faced artificial borders, weak economies, and political systems designed for their former rulers. Amidst challenges, there was hope and possibility. A new generation of leaders emerged, determined to build a just and equitable world. Stay tuned for Part 9, where we'll explore the lasting legacies of European imperialism. Yo, ever play a game of Risk where someone draws all the borders with their eyes closed? That's kind of what happened in Africa, but with real countries and real consequences. When European empires left, they didn't leave a neat and tidy world behind. Those arbitrary borders stuck around like a bad tattoo. Imagine building a nation with neighbors who have a completely different history. Talk about a recipe for disaster. The ghost of colonialism still haunts many parts of the world. All right, folks, let's talk about money, honey. European imperialism's legacy is all about following the dollar signs, built on exploitation, extracting resources, and funneling profits back to Europe. Fast forward to today, globalization connects us all, but the playing field is still uneven. Many former colonies remain economically dependent, locked in cycles of debt and poverty. Section 3. Culture clash, languages, legacies, and the enduring impact of exchange. When cultures collide, things get interesting. European imperialism left an undeniable mark on the world's cultural landscape. Ever notice how English seems to be everywhere? The language of Shakespeare and Beyoncé has become the unofficial lingua franca of globalization. But it's not just about language. From architecture and fashion to music and food, cultural cross-pollination continues to influence our lives today. Section 1. The Long Shadow of Empire. Lessons for the present. We've journeyed through centuries, witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Let's reflect on what we've learned. History isn't just about dates and names, it's about understanding the present. The legacy of European imperialism is everywhere. It's a story of ambition, innovation, and undeniable brutality. Understanding the past isn't about guilt or blame. The world today is the product of countless choices. Section 2. Unpacking the backpack, responsibility, reckoning, and moving forward. Europe messed up big time. What are we supposed to do about it now? Unpacking colonialism requires honesty, empathy, and challenging the status quo. Education, technology, and democracy came at a steep price. It's like getting a gift from someone who stole your car. Economic systems today are rooted in colonial exploitation. Recognizing the problem is the first step towards fixing it. Section 3, Borderlink Reporter, connecting the dots of history. So, there you have it, folks. A crash course in how Europe took over the world, and more importantly, why it still matters today. We've explored the ambition, the innovation, the brutality, and the enduring legacies of this complex and often contradictory period in human history. But our journey doesn't end here. At Borderlink Reporter, we're all about connecting the dots of history, uncovering the hidden stories, and sparking those aha moments that make you see the world in a whole new light. We believe that understanding the past is crucial to navigating the present and shaping a better future. So if you're ready to dive deeper, to explore more untold stories, and to join a community of curious minds who are passionate about history, hit that subscribe button and join the Borderlink Reporter crew. Trust us, you won't regret it. Stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged, because the world needs more history buffs like